During the 18th century, within the Royal Navy, warships were classified according to a rating system, primarily based on their armament. The smallest category, the sixth raters, encompassed frigates typically armed with about 20 to 26 guns. The smallest three rates were tasked with various duties worldwide, serving as convoy escorts or flagships on foreign stations. However, they were not considered suitable for large-scale fleet engagements. This role was reserved for the three largest rates, although occasional exceptions occurred, such as the appearance of 50 gunships like HMS Leander during the Battle of the Nile in 1798. Such instances were rare exceptions, however. The largest vessels in the Royal Navy were the first raters. In the 18th century, these ships typically carried around 100 cannons, and they were marvels truly of the pre-industrial era. For instance, constructing the hull of HMS Victory required nearly 2,000 oak trees. Additionally, her rigging comprised 26 miles, that is 42 kilometers of rope. The dimensions of first-rate ships of the line grew from approximately 50 meters at the start of the century to around 60 meters at gun deck level by the time HMS Victory was constructed around the mid-century. As one can imagine, constructing such a vessel required a significant amount of time and money. For instance, the building costs of HMS Victory amounted to approximately £63,000, which, when adjusted for inflation, would equate to around £740 million in today's currency. However, these were just the building costs. One should also consider the expenses incurred for manning such a vessel and maintaining it in proper condition. Before the invention and implementation of copper sheeting within the Navy, a highly effective measure against marine growth on the wooden hulls of the men of war, the Royal Navy ships had to be frequently hauled into dry dock or careened for upkeep. In particular, the construction of the earliest first-raters must have incurred astronomical costs. These ships were in fact symbols of royal power. Consequently, the king desired them to be luxuriously adorned with carvings showcasing the wealth and might of the island kingdom. The most notable example of such extravagantly decorated ships is HMS Royal Sovereign, designed by naval architect Fisher Harding for King William III during the early 18th century. The exorbitant costs of her decoration sparked considerable outrage. Eventually, it was decreed that henceforth, carving should be limited to the stern and the beakhead, while the rest should be adorned only with painting, aiming to reduce costs in the future. This decision led to the unemployment of a significant number of wood carvers who had previously worked in the dockyards. Consequently, many of them sought employment from aristocrats and the clergy. As a result, a large number of early 18th century houses and churches were decorated by craftsmen who had formerly worked for the Navy. In short, due to the significant expenses involved, only a few of these ships could be built for the Navy during the 18th century. On average, the Navy had only around 6 first-rate battleships at its disposal. Typically, only one of these vessels was actually in commission, while the others were undergoing maintenance. However, there were exceptions. For instance, during the Austrian War of Succession, when a French invasion threatened the very existence of the island nation, 3 first-rate battleships were hastily commissioned into the Channel Fleet under Admiral Norris. Additionally, in 1795, 1 year after the glorious 1st of June, both HMS Queen Charlotte and the renowned Victory were in active service at the same time. These battleships automatically served as a flagship for the admiral of a squadron. They were primarily allocated for the flags of the commander-in-chiefs of the fleets in domestic waters, typically remaining stationed in European waters and rarely venturing elsewhere. Consequently, a considerable number of first-raters participated in significant fleet engagements along the European coasts. Despite this, unlike the French, the British never lost a first-rate battleship in combat. Their adversaries never managed to sink or capture one. However, the Royal Navy lost a total of 3 first-rate battleships over the century due to accidents, human error, and natural elements. The predecessor of the current HMS Victory, the Victory built in 1737, met its demise during a storm in 1744. Then there's the infamous sinking of the Royal George, the renowned flagship of Admiral Hawke during the Battle of Quiberon Bay. She was lost at Spithead in 1782, so by the end of the American War of Independence, during which she also served diligently. The ship was intentionally heeled for maintenance of her hull, but an excessive amount of weight was applied to one side, causing the heeling process to become unstable and ultimately uncontrollable. As a result, she capsized. Tragically, at that time, many families of the seamen were visiting their serving relatives and husbands, leading to extremely crowded decks aboard the first-rate battleship. This accident claimed the lives of 800 people, ranking it among the worst maritime disasters off British shores. Then finally, there is the loss of HMS Queen Charlotte. She served as the flagship of Admiral Howe during the glorious 1st of June in 1794, marking the first major naval victory for the British during the Revolutionary Wars. Sadly, she was accidentally burned off Leghorn, Italy in 1800. After the first-rate battleships came the second-raters. These vessels were approximately the same size as the first-raters and were armed with 90 to 98 guns. However, they were much more cost-effective to construct and required fewer crew members to operate, 750 compared to the 850 of a first-rater. So, why build a first-rate battleship in the first place? The answer lies in armament. First-rates possessed significantly heavier armament than other ships. On the lower gun deck, they were equipped with 42-pounder guns compared to the 32-pounders of the second rates. On the middle deck, they boasted 24-pounders against the 18-pounders of second-rate man-o'-war. And their upper decks were furnished with 12-pounder guns as opposed to the 9-pounders of second rates, although they could occasionally be equipped with 12-pounders as well. However, after a long period of time, the first-raters lost a bit of their cutting edge. The Admiralty determined that the superior firepower of the 42-pounder over the 32-pounders did not adequately compensate for its slower rate of fire. In the 1715 Ordnance Establishment, permission was granted to exchange the 42-pounders for the 32-pounders on the gun deck if desired by the admiral or captain. By 1800, all first-raters possessed 32-pounders instead of 42s. They still possessed a formidable middle deck, however, and their few extra guns could tip the balance of a duel in their favor. The first-raters of the 18th century remained the most feared units of a squadron and served as a symbol of British sea power.